Yeah, absolutely. I think what I teach a introduction to programming class at Columbia's business school. And as a sort of data scientist by experience and training, I tend to have people who are kind of just getting into programming and just kind of learning these things that are really excited and interested in all of the novel AI machine learning techniques. And obviously for a while it was neural nets, now obviously LLMs as very specific form of model that people are getting excited about, and people really want to get right into those. And I think one of the kind of eureka moments for me in my career, and so now what I try to express and teach people on at Columbia is you have these when you're doing data science and analytics, and this was actually when I was at Palantir, and we were working with a client who was launching a new product and wanted to understand how effective this new product was, and really thought that it was going really, really well. And we came in and did some creative, but frankly relatively simple analytics. And when I teach my class, I talk about you need to know how to filter, to aggregate, to join, and to plot. You can do those four things, right? That takes you 80% of the way towards effective analytics within enterprise. And so it was really nothing more than those things. It wasn't any fancy algorithm that we developed, but it showed some really amazingly stark results, which actually showed that this new launch wasn't going as well as they had thought it was going. It was actually, they thought it was this great benefit, and it wasn't. And credit to them, it was a difficult series of conversations, but they took that in and said, okay, we need to kind of change things based on this and understanding that. And I think that's the other really important point that I took away from as well is you don't need to necessarily start. Eventually, of course, there's a lot of amazing things that AI and machine learning can do, but the very basics, you have to have that grounding in the basics, and those basics are still incredibly powerful. But ultimately, those basics need to be applied in a way that allow you to actually change a decision that's being made. And it can be either a human making that decision or a computer that's making that decision. But ultimately, if you're saying we're going to use data to inform in some way, shape, or form, right, to do these types of analytics, then it needs to be put in front of someone who can actually make a decision and change something. And so that's kind of the, that moment will always stand out as the light bulb moment for me in terms of, on the one hand, understanding, that, chasing after these, very complicated algorithms, it really needs to be right. Sort of, you need to think about, does the end justify the means, and what you're really striving for. And then the second part of it is, understanding that as we get into sort of all of these interesting analytics and ways in which you can model and understand the world, right? I always go back to, the saying, all models are wrong, some models are useful. And so the useful part, right, and understanding what that's actually going to go do and inform, and the value and the levers you can pull from that, always keeping that in mind when you're thinking about using data. Those are the two things that really have always, stood out to me, and I carry with me, to this day. Yeah, the book that comes to mind it's An American Sickness: How Healthcare Became Big Business, by Elizabeth Rosenthal. And this book is really incredible because when I first I my background is like I said, data science, and I was at Palantir for a while, and I've spent the last 7 years or so now in healthcare. And part of the reason that I wanted to move into healthcare is really just an understanding of, again, I have this data understanding and background and knowledge and analytics. And I looked and said, healthcare is 20% of GDP. It's this really incredibly big part of our economy. There's so much data that's so siloed, and obviously a ton of really important privacy concerns. But like, what's going on? Like, I felt like I just didn't really understand healthcare. And I think this book does a really good job of kind of giving a lot of the basics of how all these pieces interact and operate together. And, part of the other reason that I wanted to go into healthcare is just sort of looking at it and being like, obviously all of the sort of statistics around how much money is poured into it when outcomes aren't tracking with that, right? And so that inefficiency is clearly there. And, that's a big part of what drove me to go into healthcare and sort of understanding. This book does a great job of really explaining, the way that I have kind of always thought about it is, you've got healthcare insurance companies, the payers is sort of one part of this triangle. You've got the providers, the health systems itself, themselves on the other part of this triangle. And then obviously you've got drug manufacturers, life sciences, this other one. And it's really sort of this triangle of mistrust kind of across all of them, with the patient right in the middle, and the incentives of each of those different actors. There's nothing necessarily inherently wrong or evil or bad, but all taken in tandem together, it just creates this ecosystem that's really no longer putting the patient as the sort of center of the whole point of the healthcare system, and it becomes all of these different perverse incentives. And again, I think the book does a really good job of explaining this and laying this all out in a very understandable way. And frankly, this is a big part of why I was really excited to come in and take over as CEO of Particle Health. In a lot of ways, we really see ourselves as kind of trying to put, at least from a data perspective, right, put healthcare back into the hands of the patient. So, yeah, definitely recommend that book. I think it's a really, really good read. So, I was in high school, I was an athlete and was a club, athlete in college. And so sports has always been something that I care a lot about. And then, as I mentioned, right, I'm also a data scientist. And so understanding data and probabilities, is important to me. And I've always been very competitive. And so you kind of merge all of that together. And actually, it's been really interesting for me, obviously in the last few years. Sports gambling, sports betting has become much more pervasive and legal and all this good stuff. And, it just really fascinates me. And I do not, I bet a minimal amount of money. This isn't an effort for me to quit my day job. And certainly that's not the point of it. But I think it's the psychology of it is also really interesting to me because it forces you to really take a position, right? And sort of, put your thoughts of what are the probabilities of something happening to the test, right? This is where even, when you think about predictions, generally, like how do you think about, what does someone actually think is going to happen? Forcing them to take a bet and take a stance on it, right, is actually the best way to really elucidate someone's actual true beliefs. You can ask them, you can, poll them, survey them, but like if you have them actually have to bet, that's the best and truest form of actually understanding what someone believes. And so sort of applied to, the sports atmosphere and sort of understanding of, what are the ways in which you can gain insights into all of this. I just find it really fascinating. And I think it's, again, obviously there's a lot of, you need to make sure that it doesn't, there's a lot of potential negatives associated with it, of course. But the psychology of it and sort of, kind of understanding of how people interact with it and, what they think is the expectations of their win, how much they're going to win and how often they'll win, all of that, I think is just really fascinating. And so it's definitely my guilty pleasure and certainly, excited in the fall with NFL about to start up again. So it'll be fun.